Welcome to Freethought Matters. I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. Annie Laurie and I are co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces Freethought Matters. Today we are speaking with a Swedish woman who grew up without religion and now teaches the growing secularization of society.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces Freethought Matters, is the nation's largest association of free thinkers. That's atheists, agnostics, and other non-believers. We invite you to join us in our vital work to keep our secular government free from religious influence. Become a member at ffrf.org or ask for a complimentary copy of our newspaper, Freethought Today. Freedom depends on freethinkers. Watch prior episodes of Freethought Matters on FFRF's YouTube channel.
Is it beyond a doubt that society is becoming secularized? Our guest today, Isabella Kasselstrand, is co-author of a new book called Beyond Doubt, the Secularization of Society. Isabella is assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. Her publications and her studies explore non-religion and secularization from a cross-national and comparative perspective. She's published in many journals, including the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion.
Welcome to Freethought Matters, Professor Kasselstrand.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So first, before we talk about your book, can you tell us, how did you get interested in this topic?
Absolutely. I would be one of the sort of last people that you would think would be interested in studying religion, mostly because I just grew up living a completely sort of secular childhood. I am myself, again, a non-religious Swede. And I can count at least 4 generations of secular people in my family. And this is not something that's unusual if you grew up in Sweden like I did. Because Sweden is one of the countries that secularized the earliest. So religion was not something I was interested in growing up. And I didn't really encounter it at all. So if you imagine in the United States, in a religious town, if you're an atheist, you would be kind of the odd one out. But in the town where I grew up in Sweden, it was the complete opposite. You would just assume that everyone around you would be secular, especially younger people. So I moved to the United States when I was 21. I was a student athlete, and I went to college. And before that time, I don't think I've actually really spoken about religion with anybody ever, unless it was part of a school curriculum or similar. But when I came to the United States, it was the biggest culture shock for me was the difference in religion, because I found other aspects of sort of social life to be quite similar in terms of youth culture and the TV we would be watching and the music we would be listening to and the sports that we would be playing and doing. But religion was very different. For the first time, I had people my age talk to me about God and Jesus and the Bible and so on. And it was very, very different from anything I experienced. It still wasn't something that I was interested in studying in terms of my education. But in my final year of my undergraduate degree, I picked an elective in the economics of religion. Well, I didn't actually pick it. It was the one thing that fits into my schedule. And I decided to take this course. I wasn't too convinced that it would be an interesting course, but as I got further and further into it, I realized that was really, really fascinating. Mostly because I disagreed with a lot of what was taught in it. The premise of the course of economics of religion is the idea that religion isn't in the decline, not even in Scandinavia or Europe, where I'm from. The idea is that the demand for religion is constant, and that people everywhere, including in Sweden, where I'm from, would be more religiously active if churches just marketed themselves better, if they had more options and made it more interesting and so on. So I disagreed with it. It didn't really match with what I experienced. So I mentioned this to the professor in the course, and he just mentioned that if you don't agree with it, you should research it. And I decided to do that. And then many years later, I sent him my PhD dissertation, and we still keep in touch today. And he's bought this book or read this book now.
I thought Sweden had an established church. Is that not true anymore?
Not anymore. They used to, in year 2000, they disestablished their state church. So it still sort of functions as a national church. And a large portion of the population are still members of the church, but many are so for cultural reasons rather than necessarily for religious reasons, although the membership is in a very sharp decline, and it has been every year since the disestablishment.
So you must have had quite a culture shock when you came to this much more religious nation. And I apologize on behalf of America.
It's embarrassing.
I came to California, but I actually came to Bakersfield, California, which is it's a bit different from elsewhere in California, so to speak. But I still felt very welcome. But it was culturally very different from where I grew up.
Yeah, that's more like the Bible Belt there. So the name of your book is that it's Beyond Doubt, about secularization. So is secularization beyond doubt? Is this really happening?
Yes, absolutely. We argue in the book that secularization is happening. It's not happening everywhere. It's happening in certain countries where there are certain conditions present for this to happen. So we are seeing secularization in modern and modernizing countries around the world. So in countries where we don't have this, we aren't seeing secularization. So we aren't arguing that religion is in decline everywhere, but it certainly is in some contexts.
What is secularism or secularity?
There's lots of terms to kind of be defined here. So secularization, you could describe that as the process of decline in the significance of the social significance of religion. So it's something that happens over time. It's where religion is kind of losing its authority and its power and its presence, I guess, in society at various levels. Individual level, like beliefs and behaviors of individuals, but also it's losing sort of ground at the more kind of a macro level. It's just in society as well.
So what does secularity look like?
Oh, that's a really big question. I think sometimes a misconception that maybe perhaps especially religious people in the United States have is that secularity always means something anti-religious. And one of the arguments that we're presenting in the book is actually that advanced levels of secularity, like in Scandinavia, actually more looks like religious indifference. So if you live in a place where religion has a weaker sort of presence in public policy, in the media, in society in general, religion becomes more of a private issue and a non-issue that isn't really kind of present. So if you aren't seeing religion everywhere, and if people aren't talking to you about religion, if religious people aren't talking to you about religion, it doesn't really create that space where you need to assert your non-religiosity the same way. So for me, secularity just looks like life without religion in it. And it doesn't mean explicit atheism or anti-religiosity either.
I remember one of your co-authors, Phil Zuckerman, whom we've had on this show before. He was surveying religion in Denmark, and he reported in one of his books, and he asked people, what is your opinion about God and about religion? And a huge percentage of them said, I don't know, what? We've never thought about that. What is our opinion? He was surprised, and here in the United States, of course, if everybody's thought about it at least, we have an opinion. So indifference is probably a good term. So the United States, we've noticed a decline in the growth of the nones, people who have none of the above. What is happening in the United States? What is the degree of secularization in this country?
So the United States has previously been viewed, at least kind of in the academic debate, as one of these exceptions to secularization in the modern world. But we have seen the last sort of 10, 15 years a sharp decline in religion, especially in religious belonging, but also on other measures. So it's important to remember that secularization in the United States, it's not as it hasn't got as far as in some other modern or modernizing countries. So we still see quite high levels of religious beliefs in particular, but the decline in religious belonging, especially among younger people, millennials and younger, it's quite striking.
So, we see typically about 30% of adults say they have no religion, and some polls have shown as much as almost half of Generation Z. Is that something that your research shows?
Yes, absolutely. We are seeing, quite a strong generational sort of difference there. But it's so, one of the arguments that is presented both in our book and elsewhere is that secularization is typically a kind of a generational thing, that, a certain person's more secular than their parents, but also their children will be more secular than them, and so on. But so we are seeing that in the United States, but we are also showing in the book that on some measures, we are also seeing decline within generations. So people that were born in a certain decade, they might be less likely to attend church or religious services now than they were, 10 or 15 or 20 years ago.
And so you would say religion is declining, not just that it's changing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are seeing both, but ultimately that's just so. This maybe I'll just start with this. There's a debate happening kind of in academic research about what this religious change or secularization might look like, and some might disagree with our position that we are seeing religious decline, but rather that people's faith is changing. So rather than maybe subscribing to more conventional, especially kind of Christian sort of notions of the supernatural, God and Jesus and so on, maybe people are now instead believing in something different, something sort of supernatural or something spiritual, often things that people can't really describe in their own words and so on. It's quite abstract. But so we are seeing some of this. We are seeing a religious decline. In some contexts, we are seeing an increase in spirituality or something like that. But if we look at the most secular countries like Scandinavia or Northern Europe more broadly, there's actually some data that shows that we are seeing a decline in both. So my argument, and I presented that elsewhere in an article in the Journal of Religion in Europe, and others have made a similar argument that religious change or increase in spirituality is just kind of a sign, it's one step on the path to secularization. So it's not belief in a higher power or spirituality. It's not something that seems to be kind of sustainable or something that's more of a long-term trajectory, but something that's kind of a middle ground if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, but you do show that it is actually declining, right?
Yes. So yeah, in the most secular countries, even belief in a higher power is also in decline.
I like in your book how you summarize what you call secularization theory as the idea that modernization creates problems for religion. Does it all come down to modernization?
That's the argument that we're making. I mean, modernization is a very broad and complex process. It's something that has multiple dimensions to it. So so in the argument that we're making in the book is that there are two kind of key dimensions of modernization that again causes the problems for religion, and that would be the religious differentiation is one of them, and that means that religion no longer has carries out the same functions that it used to in the past. So in the past, churches may have been in charge of elder care and healthcare and education and people's registry and so on. But in today's society, that has, there's other institutions that carry those functions. So that would be one example of differentiation. But we also have things like separation of church and state. That's also an example of religious differentiation. And then we have the other sort of dimension of modernization that we focus on is rationalization. And that's the idea that with technological advancements and with education and so on, we now find explanations outside of religion for things. We can solve problems that we couldn't solve in the past, and we can solve them with other things than with religion.
We're speaking with Secularity researcher Professor Isabella Kasselstrand, co-author of the new book, Beyond Doubt, The Secularization of Society. And when we come back, we want to talk about secularism in Norway, Chile, and South Korea.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist.
When I first recorded that commercial back in 2014, being openly atheist in America was still fairly uncommon. Today, the fastest growing religious group in the country is the non-religious, especially among the young. That progress is heartening, but the religious pushback is fierce and the forces of Christian nationalism are well organized. Our progress won't continue unless we work together so that reason and our secular constitution will prevail. That's why I'm asking you to join the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics working to keep state and church separate, just like our founders intended. Please join the Freedom from Religion Foundation today. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
I'm Doug Hinahara, and I'm an out-of-the-closet atheist. I consider myself fortunate in that I wasn't raised in an overly religious family, so I was allowed to think for myself. And around the time I was 17, as I was exploring these ideas of religion, I was told by a fundamentalist Christian that my grandmother, who had emigrated from Japan, was destined to eternal damnation because she was a Buddhist. And I couldn't accept that, and it kind of unraveled from there for me. So at this point in my life, I've become very comfortable with the idea that I don't need religion or belief in God to be a moral person and live an ethical life. I'm proud of the fact that I have two daughters who have grown up to be wonderful young women, and I'm proud to say also atheist.
I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no religious body seeks to impose its will, directly or indirectly, upon the general populace.
Let's restore respect for America's secular roots. Help the Freedom from Religion Foundation defend the wall of separation between state and church. Join us at ffrf.org. Freedom depends on freethinkers.
And welcome back to Freethought Matters. We're continuing our conversation with Secularity researcher Professor Isabella Kasselstrand. She's the co-author of the new book, Beyond Doubt, the Secularization of Society.
So, Isabella, your research looks at 3 other countries besides the United States: Norway, Chile, and South Korea. First, why these countries?
The first 2, or actually this is chapter 2 and 3 of the book, we focus on the evidence, specifically kind of the quantitative evidence for secularization. So we use data from various sources, such as the World Values Survey and the European Values Study. They have collected nationally representative data from many countries around the world. So this is high quality data. In one of the chapters, we're giving kind of the global overview, looking at well over 100 countries. And then in the next chapter, we are picking these 4 case studies that you mentioned, so Norway, Chile, South Korea, and the United States. And we could have picked other ones, but we decided to pick these specifically because not only do they share some important similarities, maybe most importantly, they actually are quite different. So these are 4 countries that are all modern or modernizing. They are all secularizing, but they are at different stages of secularization and modernization. They are also in different locations around the globe. They are different in terms of their history with religion. One of them not being at least historically Christian, one being in Latin America, one in Asia, and so on. So we try to show that it's not just a Western phenomenon, secularization. We are actually seeing this in quite different global locations as well. And that's why we picked these 4 countries.
Well, Norway, I know Norway has the largest humanist association in the world. They've got many thousands. Isn't Norway just pretty secular country?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Norway does have a very large humanist association. It is also one of the more secular countries in the world. So, that's absolutely true there.
And how do you know about secularism in South Korea and in Chile?
Luckily, we do have such really, some really great data from the World Values Survey in particular, that they ask similar survey questions, the same survey questions in multiple countries around the world, all of these countries around the world, asking questions about people's religious beliefs and behaviors and their belonging and so on. With this data, we can kind of compare levels across countries, but also over time, because they've collected data for several decades now. Of course, there are some challenges in comparing statistics and survey questions across different cultures and languages and so on. But it's pretty convincing data that we have.
So how many secular people are there in South Korea and Chile?
So I don't have the specific sort of number in front of me, but what we are seeing is, for example, South Korea is an interesting country because it was one of these countries that actually had quite an increase in Christianity, especially in Protestant Christianity, kind of alongside sort of the Americanization of South Korea. So South Korea actually initially looked like a kind of a counterexample to secularization. But if we look at the more sort of recent data over the last sort of 10 to 20 years, we are seeing a very sharp decline in Christianity in South Korea, especially among the younger South Koreans.
And what about Chile?
Chile is also very interesting, because again, it's a historically sort of Catholic country, but it's one of the countries in the world that has, there has been, scandals and things like that happening, but it's one of the countries that have the lowest confidence in religious institutions
Really?
That we have in the data. And we have also, again, seen very sharp decline in religious participation and identification with the Catholic Church. We aren't seeing as strong of a decline in religious beliefs. Again, kind of going hand in hand with the argument that I made about being earlier in the sort of process of religious decline, but we are seeing a decline in religious beliefs as well.
So do you think, in the big picture, we only have about a minute left here, do you think, or do scholars think, that religion is something that's innate in our species, or is it something that we can find immaterial?
Yeah, no, I mean, some people do make the argument that religion is innate. And for me, when I first came across that argument, I thought it just sounded really strange, just because I have grown up living such a secular life that it certainly hasn't felt like I've been missing anything. Now, I'm a sociologist. I don't really think something like that would be innate. I think religion is something that's taught. I think there's loads of people around the world that can serve as evidence that people aren't sort of born with a religion, certainly.
Well, I don't think I was.
Yeah, she's a third-generation freethinker.
But who knows if there's a propensity to credulity or incredulity, I guess. And so briefly, do you think religion will continue to fade?
Yeah, I mean, again, we make this argument in the book that as long as we are seeing kind of continued kind of economic prosperity and differentiation and continued technological advancements and so on, there is no reason to believe that religion wouldn't continue to decline. But again, it's not impossible that that religion might have another surge, but I think it's very unlikely and certainly not something that we have seen in the data.
Well, I really enjoy your book, Beyond Doubt, The Secularization of Society, and looking forward to anything new you might be writing someday. We really appreciate you coming on Freethought Matters to be with us today, Isabella Kasselstrand.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you.
And thank you for watching Freethought Matters.
Because free thought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.